In just 79 seconds, under a clear Indiana sky, 3 state-of-the-art cranes, steel cables thick as a man's arm, and a crew of specialists who had relocated monuments twice its size, were defeated by a 70-year-old promise carved in stone. The statue of the Keeper of the Crest did not move. Not a fraction of an inch. Some say it was a miracle. Others call it an unsolved engineering failure. But the real question is, what force is strong enough to hold a 2-ton marble figure to the earth against the full might of modern machinery? Was it a sacred vow, a geological anomaly, or something else entirely? Before you hear the full, untold story, if you believe some mysteries are meant to challenge us, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments what you think holds more weight, steel or faith. The Keeper of the Crest stands on the highest point of Providence Rise in Chapel Crest, Indiana, a quiet, overlooked town surrounded by rolling fields and maple-lined back roads. From miles away, the white marble figure of the Virgin Mary can be seen, arms open, eyes lowered, as if she has been watching the town's every sunrise and every storm since the day she arrived. To the townspeople, she is not just a statue. She is a sentinel, a promise carved in stone. They have brought their joys, their griefs, their newborns, and their dying to her feet for generations. And for those generations, they have whispered one unspoken truth. You do not touch the lady on the hill. No one remembers exactly who placed her there, at least not in the same way. To old Klara Rostova, it was the Polish immigrant family who returned from the war with nothing but their faith and a profound debt to God. To Pastor Thomas, it was the parish priest back when the town still had daily mass and every man in the county wore a suit to church. And to the teenagers who sneak up there on summer nights, she has just always been there, like the hill itself. But those stories, however different, all lead back to one unshakable belief. The Keeper chose this spot, and she is staying. Then came the plans, delivered in glossy brochures and discussed in city council meetings behind closed doors. The proposal had an elegant name, the Chapel Crest Spiritual Retreat and Resort, a vision to bring faith-based tourism to a struggling town. In the small print, so small that most people missed it at first, was a single, innocuous line: relocate existing statue to accommodate new access road. The leak started in whispers of the Crest Cafe over black coffee. By Friday, every shop on Main Street was talking. By Sunday, Father Thomas couldn't get through his sermon without catching the sharp, restless eyes of his parishioners. Half the town saw a chance to pull themselves out of decades of economic decline. The other half felt a cold, deep dread, the kind you can't quite explain, only that it's the kind you get when you know something sacred is about to be violated. And then the stories began. No one in Chapel Crest agrees on every detail of how the Keeper came to stand on Providence Rise, but certain fragments, passed down through families, whispered in kitchens, and retold at church potlucks, form a story that has outlived the people who first spoke it. The year was 1951. America was still catching its breath after the war. The town was smaller then, just a cluster of clapboard houses, one general store, a post office the size of a tool shed, and the old St. Casimir's church at the bottom of the hill. That winter, a storm unlike any they had seen in decades rolled across Indiana. Heavy rain, ice, and a wind strong enough to snap power poles in half. On the third night, the Wabash River swelled to the edge of its banks, and the townspeople braced for a flood that could wipe out everything they owned. And then, without any warning, the wind shifted. The storm's path bent, skirting the hill entirely. The floodwaters receded as quickly as they had risen. Some called it luck. Others called it something else. Among them were Pyotr Kovalik, a veteran of the Pacific, and his wife Sophia. The storm had hit on the very day they received word that their youngest son, declared missing in action in Korea, was alive and coming home. For them, it was not a coincidence. It was a sign, an answered prayer of the highest order. Sophia told her neighbors that night, over a pot of simmering stew, her voice thick with emotion, "We owe her a promise. She saved our boy, and she saved this town. We will keep her here, where everyone can see her, watching over us." By spring, plans were quietly forming. There were no permits, no committees, no architects, just men with shovels and women with casseroles to feed them. Children hauled buckets of gravel up the dirt path, slipping in the mud, but laughing all the same. The marble itself came from a quarry 2 counties over, a massive slab donated by a Catholic parish that couldn't afford to finish its own renovations. An out-of-work stonecutter named Stefan Petrovich, who had once carved saints for basilicas in Chicago, took the job for free. He worked in silence for weeks in an open-air shed at the foot of the hill. His only company was the rhythmic sound of his chisel striking stone. Locals say he prayed under his breath with every cut, though no one could ever make out the words. When the statue was finished, Mary in flowing robes, her eyes downcast in gentle contemplation, her arms open in a gesture of eternal welcome, the entire town of Chapel Crest turned out to see her placed on the hilltop. It was just after dawn on a crisp spring morning. Men carried her in carefully wrapped pieces up the slope, fitting them together like a sacred, intricate puzzle. The base was packed with stones donated by each and every family, a piece of their land, their hearth, their history, their very soul. Somewhere under all that concrete and stone, Sophia Kovalik slipped a folded piece of paper deep in the foundation while the mortar was still wet. No one knew what it said until decades later, when the relentless wind and rain of Indiana winters wore the mortar thin enough to reveal the fragile edges of that paper. The promise, once a private vow, was now etched into the very land. Over the years, the keeper of the crest became more than just stone and marble. She became a fixture in every life story. High school seniors came to her the night before graduation, leaving corsages and handwritten notes about their hopes for the future. War widows sat on the stone steps when the weight of their loss grew too heavy to bear alone. Farmers left baskets of their first harvest of corn and apples in the fall, a quiet offering for her blessing on the seasons to come. And then there were the strange, inexplicable moments no one could quite explain away. A single votive candle burning through an entire January night without a hint of the wax dripping down. A majestic hawk that circled Providence rise for 3 days straight, then vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. A little girl who wandered off during a summer church picnic and was found 2 hours later at the base of the statue, safe, dry, and smiling, though the frantic searchers swore on their lives they had combed that exact spot multiple times. Whether you choose to call them miracles or myths, the stories wove themselves into the very fabric of Chapel Crest. They became so ingrained in the town's identity that by the time outsiders began talking about moving the statue, it felt less like a public works decision and more like someone suggesting the town should cut out its own heart. Ask the older folks, and they will tell you the keeper has been there longer than the street lamps, longer than the paved road into town, longer even than some of the ancient oak trees on the hill. Ask the younger ones, and they might shrug dismissively until you watch them walk past the statue and notice, almost unconsciously, the way their eyes flick upward, just to make sure she is still there. Because in Chapel Crest, faith is not always shouted from the pulpit. Sometimes it is carved in stone, standing against the wind on a hill that refuses to give her up. It started quietly, the way most storms brew in small towns, behind doors that the average resident never walks through. In the brick municipal building on Main Street, under the incessant hum of fluorescent lights, the Chapel Crest City Council met for what was described on the public agenda as a special planning session. Inside, a slick PowerPoint presentation clicked through digital renderings of a gleaming new project, the Chapel Crest Spiritual Retreat and Resort. On the screens, Providence Rise had been transformed. The simple dirt path became a paved, winding drive lined with ornamental cherry trees. A massive, glass-walled visitor center stood at the summit. And at the far edge of the property, tucked away near a new parking lot, sat the statue of the keeper, her white marble almost glowing under the artist's carefully crafted digital sunlight. It was the first time in over 70 years that anyone in a position of authority had seriously suggested moving her from her watch. To the council and the development team from Indianapolis, it made perfect logical sense. It was about accessibility, visibility, and convenience for the tour buses they envisioned. To them, the keeper was a valuable piece of local history worth preserving, just in a more practical and accessible spot. But that single decision, buried in the footnotes of a glossy, 100-page proposal, would become a lit match to dry timber. The first to hear about it wasn't a council member or a journalist. It was a part-time clerk at the planning office, a young mother named Sarah Peters, who spotted the relocation line while scanning documents for filing. She told her aunt over breakfast the next day. By that evening, the news was halfway around town, spreading like a fever. At the Crest Cafe, the regulars leaned across the counter to whisper in hushed, angry tones. At the grain co-op, old farmers paused their morning coffee break to shake their heads in grim disbelief. No one had seen it coming, yet somehow, everyone had always feared it might. The town's reaction was split, but not in the way outsiders might expect. Some saw a lifeline. "This place is dying," muttered Robert Cooper, the owner of the local auto shop, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "A resort like that could bring jobs, bring some life back to Main Street for our kids." Others felt a cold, primal chill crawl up their spine. "You move her. You move the blessing," said Teresa Riley, who still walked up the hill every Friday with a bundle of fresh lilies. "And when the blessing leaves, nothing good follows." By Sunday Mass at St. Casimir's, the divide in Chapel Crest had become a palpable, uncomfortable presence. On one side of the church steps, younger couples talked animatedly about rising property values, about the chance to get their children into better schools with the influx of tax revenue. On the other side, older parishioners clutched their rosaries a little tighter, their eyes scanning the hill in the distance, as if to check that the keeper was still standing her silent watch. Father Thomas heard both sides in the confessional and in the aisles of the grocery store, and he wisely kept his counsel, though he lingered longer than usual at the altar rail after the service, his lips moving in a silent prayer no one else could hear. And then there were the fence-sitters, those who didn't know what to believe but couldn't shake the unnerving feeling that the town was stepping on a treacherously thin ice. In the evenings, the debate spilled out onto front porches and across kitchen tables. A group of teenagers hanging out near the high school baseball field argued passionately about whether moving the statue would break some ancient spell or whether it was all just a silly story about a rock. At the nursing home, Clara Rostova, who had been there on the very day the keeper was placed, told anyone who would listen that promises made to heaven were not meant to be rewritten by city councils. The tension wasn't loud or violent. It was a low, simmering anxiety. There were no protests, no picket signs, just a subtle, chilling shift in how people looked at each other across the grocery aisle. Then came the first quiet gesture of defiance. One Tuesday evening, a small group, 8 people at most, walked the familiar path up Providence Rise with candles in their hands. They knelt at the statue's base, their small flames flickering in the gentle wind. They didn't speak. They didn't chant. They simply stayed until the wax burned low, then left without a single word. By the next night, the group had doubled in size. Within a week, there were 30 people on the hill, their collective prayers rising under the vast, open sky. And yet, no one dared to call it protest. It was quieter than that, more certain, more resolute. Meanwhile, the developers sent in their surveyors, men in crisp polos and baseball caps, armed with clipboards and sophisticated laser measures. They walked the slope, took photographs, and asked pointed questions like, "When was this foundation poured? And is there any record of a building permit for this structure?" Those questions made the town's people bristle with a protective anger. No one had ever needed a permit to pray. The town was now split into 2 clear camps. And in the middle of it all, Providence Rise stood untouched, the keeper's gaze remaining fixed on the town below, as if she had seen this kind of struggle before and knew exactly how it would end. The first sign that this would be no ordinary relocation came to a man who didn't believe in signs. Kevin Shaw was a sharp, ambitious architecture student from Purdue, interning with the development team. His job was simple: measure the base of the statue, take detailed photographs, and submit a draft for the proposed new relocation platform. On his second morning in Chapel Crest, he hiked up Providence Rise with a tablet in one hand and a half-empty latte in the other. It was an unremarkable day. Mid-September, warm sun, a few white clouds drifting lazily overhead. He crouched, ran his laser measure along the edge of the pedestal, and muttered to himself about the sloppy, unprofessional original work. Later that night, in the sterile motel room the developers had booked for him, Kevin dreamed of the statue falling forward, not crumbling into pieces, but toppling in one impossible, solid mass. It crashed down directly onto the blueprints he had printed out earlier that evening, shattering the paper into a fine, gray dust. When he jolted awake, the clock on his phone read 3:33 a.m. The dream left his shirt damp with sweat, his chest tight and constricted, as if the very air in the room had been thinner than it should be. By the next morning, Kevin had requested to be reassigned to a downtown survey site. He offered no explanation. The second sign was far less subtle. 2 days later, a seasoned contractor from Indianapolis named Rick Peters came to inspect the slope for heavy equipment placement. Rick had worked on major lift projects for 30 years, moving everything from Civil War cannons to massive granite memorial arches. On the hill's first step, a broad slab of limestone worn smooth by decades of weather and footsteps, his boots suddenly slid out from under him. The stone was as dry as bone, but he went down hard, his fall broken by his outstretched arm, fracturing his wrist in 2 places. "That's just bad footing," the foreman later told reporters with a dismissive shrug. But those who had been there swore the air had turned colder in that exact moment, just for a single breath, and that every bird in the nearby maple grove had gone completely silent. Then came the bell. It was a Friday evening, still light enough to see the rolling lines of the hills to the west. Teresa Riley was arranging her weekly offering of lilies at the base of the statue when she heard it. 3 slow, deliberate tolls from somewhere directly above her head. The sound was deep, metallic, and it seemed to hang in the air far longer than it should have. She glanced up, half expecting to see a teenager with a portable speaker playing a prank. But there was nothing. No bell, no tower, just the open sky and the faint, unmistakable smell of rain, though no storm was anywhere in sight. By Sunday, a half-dozen others claimed they had heard it too, always in threes, always at dusk. 79 seconds. That's how long it took for modern engineering to meet an immovable faith. The final attempt came on a crisp Monday morning in late October. The sun rose clear, the air still. At the base of Providence Rise, 2 massive flatbed trucks idled beside a crane the size of a 3-story building. Steel cables, thick as pythons, lay coiled on the ground. Men in hard hats moved with the clipped, confident precision of people who had done this 100 times before. By 8 a.m., a silent crowd had formed at the bottom of the slope. At 8:27, the primary crane's engine roared to life. The cables tightened, the boom arm lifted, and the statue did not move. The operator frowned, increased the pull. The steel groaned, the tension gauge climbed, and with a sharp, violent snap, one of the main cables whipped free, slamming into the dirt. The foreman cursed. The second attempt began at dawn on Tuesday with new, heavier cables and a powerful winch truck. The winch motor growled, the crane tilted forward under the immense strain, but the keeper stayed rooted to her spot. The only thing that moved was the winch truck itself, its heavy tires sinking an inch into the solid earth, as if something was pulling back with equal force. The operator cut the power. The third attempt on Thursday involved a backhoe, its bucket meant to bite into the earth and free the foundation. 10 inches down, the machine began to rattle violently. The operator swore he felt the bucket kick back, as if it had struck something alive. Seconds later, a loud crack split the air, and the hydraulic arm froze mid-motion, a thin stream of fluid hissing onto the dirt. By now, the crew was spooked. The fourth and final attempt never made it past the setup. On Saturday morning, as workers were securing the lift straps, the weather shifted. No clouds, no warning. Just a sudden, violent gust of air, so sharp it sent paper plans tumbling down the hill. "Just get it done," the foreman shouted. They never got the chance. Without a rumble of thunder, without any hint of rain, a single, brilliant bolt of lightning struck the ground less than 15 feet from the base of the statue. The sound was deafening, the flash blinding. One man dropped to his knees, hands clamped over his ears. Another fell backward, unharmed but pale as a ghost. The foreman grabbed his radio. "Shut it down. Shut all down. Now." By that afternoon, the heavy equipment was being loaded back onto the trailers. The developers issued a short, vague statement citing unexpected technical issues. But everyone on that hill, from the engineers to the silent watchers below, knew better. They had just witnessed a 79-second-long conversation, and the final word had been spoken from the hill. When the calls started coming in from Chapel Crest, most news outlets in Indiana brushed them off as small-town drama. But not the Indianapolis Chronicle, a regional paper known for its deep-dive human interest pieces. That's how Ryan Carter entered the story. At 28, Ryan was still considered the kid in the newsroom. He was sharp, ambitious, but a skeptic to the bone. He had built his reputation on methodically dismantling urban legends, stories of haunted houses that turn out to be mold-infested, tales of miracle cures that were nothing more than rebranded supplements. When his editor slid a thin file across his desk, 3 printed emails, a handful of blurry cell phone snapshots of Providence Rise, Ryan raised a skeptical eyebrow. "A statue they can't move," he said flatly. "You want me to cover that?" The editor leaned back in his worn chair. "I want you to find the truth. Write it up. Kill the myth. That's your specialty, isn't it?" Ryan drove into town on a Thursday afternoon. He wore a navy button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, sunglasses tucked into his collar, a heavy camera bag in the passenger seat. He expected to find a sleepy place, clinging desperately to a relic, perhaps even fabricating a story for attention. What he found was quieter and heavier than he had ever imagined. The main street was lined with brick storefronts, some boarded up, some still defiantly open. People moved slowly, their eyes shifting toward the hill almost unconsciously, as if checking a landmark. The statue, visible from half a mile away, seemed to anchor the entire horizon. His first interviews were polite but intensely guarded. At the Crest Cafe, a waitress named Teresa poured his coffee and answered his questions with tight, half-smiles. "You can write whatever you want, hun," she said, her voice low. "But don't make fun of her." At the grain co-op, a retired farmer offered a similar, almost ominous warning. "Believe it or don't. Just don't mock the keeper." That never ends well for anyone. No one tried to convince him of miracles. No one shoved grainy photos in his face. It was as if the entire town had collectively decided their job wasn't to convert him, but simply to make sure he understood the boundaries. That first night, Ryan checked into the only motel in town. He reviewed the video footage he'd taken of the hill from various angles. At minute 7 of the second reel, something flickered behind the statue, white fast, almost like a piece of fabric catching the light. He froze the frame, zoomed in. It could have been lens flare. It could have been nothing. The next morning, he climbed Providence Rise alone. The air was cool, the grass still damp with dew. He stood at the base of the statue, notebook in hand, jotting down details. Weathered marble, faint chisel marks along the robe's folds, a hairline crack at the base that seemed to run deeper than it should. The skepticism hadn't vanished, but it was shifting, being replaced by a feeling he couldn't yet name. A sense that there was more to this place than folklore, and more to the keeper than just stone. It was Teresa, the waitress at the Crest Cafe, who finally told Ryan where to find her. "Last house on Poplar Lane," she said, refilling his coffee for the 3rd time. "White porch, 2 rocking chairs. If anyone knows the real truth about the keeper, it's Mrs. Clara Rostova." Clara was 91, her frame as slight as a bird's, but her gaze was steady and clear. She sat on that porch as if she had been carved there herself, wrapped in a thick, knitted shawl, watching the hill the way some people watch the ocean. When Ryan arrived, she didn't ask who he was or why he had come. She just gestured to the empty rocking chair beside her. "You want to know where she came from?" she said, her voice a soft rasp. It was not a question. He nodded, his reporter's notebook feeling strangely inadequate in his hands. Clara's eyes shifted toward Providence Rise, and for a long, quiet moment, she didn't speak. The wind stirred the hem of her shawl. "It was the winter of '51, she began, her voice low but clear as a bell. "We didn't have much in Chapel Crest back then. No paved roads, no proper grocery store, barely enough people to fill St. Casimir's on Sundays. But we had each other, and we had that hill. That January, a storm came that should have drowned them. Days of freezing rain, ice thick enough to crack the limbs of ancient oak trees, a wind that howled like it was tearing the sky apart. The river rose fast, too fast, and everyone knew it was only a matter of hours before it spilled over and erased the town." Clara leaned forward slightly, her small, gnarled hands clasped in her lap. And then, just like that, it stopped. The wind shifted, the water dropped, and the storm rolled east. The next morning, You could walk to the edge of town and see where the flood had been heading, straight for us before it simply turned away. She paused, letting the weight of the memory settle between them. People called it luck, but not Sofia Kowalik. Sofia and her husband Piotr were one of the few Polish immigrant families in town. Their son had just come home from the war, alive after being listed as missing for months. The night the storm turned, Sofia told anyone who'd listened that they owed the Blessed Mother a promise. "If you saved our boy and you saved our town," she said, "then we will keep you here forever." The promise soon became a plan. No permits, no fundraising drives, just neighbors hauling stone and timber up the steep slope. A stonemason named Stefan Petrovich, out of work and out of options, took the job for free. He was an artist, Clara said softly. He didn't talk much, but when he carved her face, it was like he already knew her. The statue went up in the spring. The whole town gathered at the base. Every family brought a single stone to place into the foundation, a piece of themselves to lay beneath her feet. And then, when no one was looking, Sofia slipped a folded piece of paper deep into the wet mortar. Clara saw her do it. She didn't tell anyone what it said. Not for decades. It was only when Sofia was in her final days that she asked for the note to be read. It was a single sentence in Sofia's careful, looping hand. "If you save our town, we will keep you here forever." Ryan finally found his voice. "What happened to the note?" Clara's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "It's still there, right where she put it. You can't see it now, but you don't have to." The keeper remembers. After the final, failed attempt, Providence Rise went quiet. It was not the kind of quiet you notice all at once, but the kind that grows day by day until you realize something profound is missing. There were no more roaring engines, no more shouts of men measuring and drilling, no more steel cables snaking across the grass, just the wind whispering through the maples, the soft crunch of boots from those who still climbed the slope, and the occasional, heartfelt murmur of a prayer. The developers did not hold a press conference. The city council did not make an announcement. The relocation date simply vanished from the public agenda, and the glossy posters for the Chapel Crest Spiritual Retreat and Resort began to disappear from store windows one by one, like autumn leaves falling from a tree. To the townspeople, that profound silence spoke louder than any official statement ever could. In the weeks that followed, life in Chapel Crest began to settle back into its familiar rhythm, but it was not the same as it was before. The people who had argued for the move no longer spoke about opportunity in quite the same way. Some avoided the topic altogether. Others, quietly and without any fanfare, began to join the evening walks up Providence Rise. Teresa Riley, who had brought her lilies to the statue every Friday for decades, noticed something subtle but certain. There were more footsteps on the path, not just those of the older generation, but of young couples, teenagers, even small children clutching their parents' hands. Some came with flowers. Some came with nothing but a few minutes to stand in the open air beside the keeper. Even Ryan Carter, the journalist, changed. He stayed in town for weeks after his assignment had officially ended. He never admitted to believing in miracles, but when asked why he was still there, he would only say, "Some stories take longer to finish." He started attending the evening gatherings, not as a reporter with a camera, but as another quiet face in the circle. He lit candles, he listened to the low hum of hymns, and he learned the names of the people whose lives had been shaped in ways large and small by the silent lady on the hill. The dirt path was leveled and lined with fresh gravel by a team of anonymous volunteers. A small, handcrafted wooden table appeared at the base of the statue for flowers and handwritten notes. No one ever claimed credit for building it, but everyone used it. The lady didn't move, but the people did. The story began to spread, and a trickle of visitors came to see her. They didn't arrive in busloads. They came in pairs and families, in ones and twos, often leaving as quietly as they had come. And maybe that is the real miracle. Not a statue that refuses to move, but a community that chose to stand still with her. So if you ever find yourself driving the back roads of Indiana and see a glint of white marble above the tree line, pull over, take the walk, and stand at her feet. You do not need to believe in miracles to understand why she is still there. You just need to listen. If you were moved by this story, give this video a like, share it with someone who might need a moment of grace today, and subscribe so you will not miss the next story where faith, mystery, and the human heart meet.